Who did that? Dennis did. He always does. All right, well, thank you for coming out on this blustery day. I was just saying that there's not very many exciting slides when you're talking about oaths, so we're saving the good slides for Peter at the end, where we have some visuals. But we'll begin. In late 1716, very early on in the history of our community, the Werkzeug Johann Adam Gruber and the scribe Heinrich Sigmund Gleim started a long missionary journey through southern Germany and Switzerland. Dozens of testimonies through Gruber were delivered during that journey. And in January of 1717, they came to Zurich, Switzerland. And what happened there is recorded by both Gruber and Gleim in manuscript form, and many copies of these were made and disseminated throughout the 18th century because it was the title of Gruber and Gleim's Leiden zu Zurich, Gruber and Gleim's Suffering in the City of Zurich. And what happened there, like I said, was recounted by them both, and then Gottlieb Scheuner actually printed it in 1884 in part of his Inspirations history. While they were in Zurich, Gruber delivered an inspired testimony that was directed towards the city council, and it pointed out to the council members how hypocritical they were, how corrupt they were, how ungodly they were. It wasn't well received. And both Gruber and Gleim were thrown into prison for several days. And while they were in prison, sometimes during the day they would be taken out and put in the pillories, and people were probably throwing rotten vegetables at them. A copy of the testimony was burned at their feet while they were pilloried. They were driven through the streets and beaten with sticks, and all kinds of public humiliation and public ridicule. They were even whipped in public at times. Finally, after a few days of this, they were taken to the city gates and told that they were free to go if they would swear to never return. You'd think they would be quite anxious to get out of Dodge. After suffering all that, you'd think it would have been quite easy for them to swear. In Switzerland, the way you took an oath was you'd raise 3 fingers, symbolizing the Trinity. And they needed to swear on the Trinity that they would never return. Simple as that, and they could leave. But they didn't do it. They offered a handshake, they offered their word, but they would not swear that oath. So they were put back into prison for a few more days. Finally, I think the city people just got sick of them and said, all right, get out of here. They were taken to town and to the edge of town and told never to come back. So I think this episode in particular shows just how serious the Inspirationists took their belief that they were not to swear oaths. There's all kinds of examples throughout the history, especially in the 18th century, of Inspirationists getting into trouble and being thrown into jail for the simple reason of not swearing an oath. In fact, an Inspirationist was more likely to be thrown in jail because of oaths than for their belief in inspiration, or for their belief on what communion should be, or for their belief in what baptism should be. They were more likely to be thrown into jail because of oaths than for those much more, what I would think, serious considerations. But from very early on, they held that belief that they should not swear oaths. There's a few other examples, few other episodes. In 1771, in the city of Colmar, which is now in France, 12 inspirationists were thrown into jail because they would not swear an oath. And they were simply called to court to testify on a legal matter, but they would not swear that oath. And they were thrown into jail and stayed in jail, had to stay in jail for several weeks. And one of the guys wrote a letter while in jail and said that he did not swear, he refused to swear according to community rules and biblical interpretation. In 1823, Barbara Lanman, and she recounts in her autobiography that Gottlieb Scheuner also printed and translated by Janet. Barbara Lanman recounts in her autobiography that in 1823, she and her husband were called to testify in court about certain prayer meetings that the Inspirationists were having in the city of Bischweiler, and about their refusal to send the kids to school. But she and her husband refused to swear. Simply a simple oath that, I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They did not do that. They would not do that. They refused. And when the court official said, why not? Lanman said, because Christ forbade it. And that took the court judges back, and they recessed the proceedings. They met and finally decided, she's right. We're gonna let her go on this one. She can just affirm or attest that what she says is true. She doesn't have to swear an oath. Some places actually did allow people to affirm or attest. That is, not to swear, but to just say, what I say is true. I affirm this. One of those places was the city of Neuwied in Germany. And in 1739, the prince in charge of Neuwied issued a resolution that exempted the Inspirationists from a lot of things, including oath-taking, that they could give a handshake and their word, and that would be as good as swearing an oath. And I think that's that toleration there is one reason why Neuwied became such an important place in the history of our community, and that's where Paul Giesebart Nagel lived, and it was a vibrant community throughout the history of the Inspirationists. So what exactly was the Inspirationist position on oath-taking, and on what is it based? It wasn't really formalized until 120 years after the founding of our community, and it was formalized in a Glaubensbekenntnis, or a profession of faith, which was formulated in 1839, not printed until 50 years later, really. But in 1838, the community started having serious trouble with ministry at Hessen-Darmstadt. And one of the points of contention was that the ministry was no longer allowing them to be exempt from oath-taking. They were requiring them to swear oaths just like everybody else had to. And the Inspirationists were refusing, and many of them were imprisoned for a while. And then in June 9th of 1838, Christian Metz delivered a testimony. And this is the only testimony I found actually that addresses oath-taking. None of the early testimonies in the 18th century from Rock or Gruber or any of those guys address oath-taking. But this is what Metz said in a testimony. When the Word became flesh in the days of his humanity, it said, "You shall not swear. I speak today, my children, my community, you are not to swear an oath." And that is really the only testimony that we have. And here's a translation of that Glaubensbekenntnis. You can see it's very short. There's not much they say about it. And really, the only basis that the Inspirationists used to justify not swearing an oath is Matthew 5, verse 34 and 37. This is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, okay? And verse 34, but I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, it goes on. And then verse 37 is really the key. Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. This was repeated by James in his letter. Verse 12, above all, my brothers, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Let your yes be yes and your no, no, or you will be condemned. So this is the entire basis. These Bible verses are the entire basis of the inspirationist belief to not swear oaths. And for them, that was good enough. It didn't need a lot of elaboration. You don't see Gruber writing a dissertation on oath taking, like on inspiration or justifying their belief on communion or baptism or anything like that. Simply, these verses are enough for the inspirationists. It needed no elaboration. But it did, however, once they got to America, it did require a reminder, because once they came to America, oaths were no longer an issue for them. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but in the United States, in U.S. law, you can affirm or attest. You don't have to swear an oath. So that when they came to the United States, it wasn't a big deal like it had been in Germany. So the Bruderrat, the Council of Elders, often issued reminders to the community. Now remember, we're not supposed to swear oaths, okay? So several times. Here they published a message to the community in June of 1894. Since in this land we have freedom of conscience and religion, and the Constitution and federal laws grant us the right to refuse to take oaths, and since the teachings and commandments of the Lord Jesus instruct us not to swear or take oaths, some of our younger brethren need to be informed of what their forebears suffered in Germany, where this freedom did not exist. Then in 1898, they published a pamphlet which again reminded the members that oath-taking was one of the reasons they came to America, because of the suffering in Germany, and that here they were free not to swear oaths, so they should not. It seems to me like in communal Amana, sometimes like a township trustee or somebody like that who had to have a county office, they would be asked to swear an oath of office. And Bruderrat was reminding them, you don't have to swear an oath, just attest, just affirm. So let's look at oaths just a little more generally first, before we go on. An oath is a solemn promise invoking a divine witness. It's often accompanied by some outward sign, putting your hands on the Bible in Switzerland, raising 3 fingers for the Trinity, raise your right hand, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, all that. Some outward sign that goes along with this solemn promise. And the divine witness, of course, is key there too. There are several types of oath. Oaths are common tools, and the reason the inspirationists got in trouble with the governments, of course, is because the governments were requiring oath-taking at the time in Germany. But there are common tools used by governments and authorities throughout history. There's really 3 basic types. In courts of law and legal proceedings, where you're just called upon to testify, oaths of office, anything from the office of a township trustee to the President of the United States takes an oath of office. As I recall, and Peter could correct me on this, I think only one president in the history of the United States decided to affirm and attest rather than swear to uphold the Constitution. Who, I can't remember.
Franklin Pierce.
Franklin Pierce. Okay. I knew you'd know that. And then there's loyalty oaths. which are probably the most insidious and the most problematic and figure the most in world history. Loyalty oaths are something when a government or a ruler feels, often when they feel threatened or by rebels or anything like that, they require people to take an oath of loyalty. In fact, one reason why Ursula Meyer left Switzerland to come to Germany was because in her hometown of Bern, Switzerland, the Reformed Church there were requiring people to take loyalty oaths to the church because of the pietist movement at the time. They wanted to feel assured that everyone was loyal to the church, and Ursula Meyer's family moved to Germany in part because of that requirement and other persecution as well. When you think about loyalty oaths, the whole feudal system in Europe in the Middle Ages was based on loyalty oaths from the vassal to the lord. It held everything together, those religious oaths. Under Henry VIII in England, a lot of people lost their jobs and their heads because they would not swear the oath of supremacy, which recognized the King of England as the head of the church rather than the Pope. Adolf Hitler took it a step further and required everyone to swear an oath loyal to him personally, rather than to the state or the country or the Constitution. Every soldier in the German army had to swear loyalty to Adolf Hitler. And even in the United States in 1950, the state of California passed a law. It was during the height of the communist scare in the United States. The state of California passed a law that required every government employee, including university professors, to swear an oath of loyalty to the state of California and denounce communism, which caused all kinds of problems. But I need to point out that loyalty oaths didn't really play so much for the inspirationists. It was these simple things, okay? These simple things, just swear that you'll tell the truth. But they wouldn't even do something like that. It wasn't the content of the oath. It was simply taking an oath at all that was the hang-up for the inspirationists. And as I said, I think it's ironic that an inspirationist was more likely to be thrown in jail because of refusing to take an oath in the court of law than he was for practicing a different form of communion or baptism or believing in inspiration. A major problem with oaths, of course, is that they don't often accomplish their purpose. One writer likened oaths to nets, like a fish net or a trap. He said, those unscrupulous people, those people without conscience, those knaves, he called them, will falsely swear and slip through the net, okay? While conscientious people, honest people, who have no intention of going against the loyalty or anything like that, will hesitate to swear the oath and will get caught in that net. And in Barbara Landmann's account, when she's talking about her and her husband not swearing, she said, there was a guy next to me, and while the court was deliberating what to do with me for not swearing an oath, the guy next to me said, you should have just sworn, it would have been a lot easier. And of course he was right, it would have been. But she didn't. So, to digress just a little bit, one of the things always associated with the inspirationists and not swearing oaths was their appeal to conscience, okay? They would say, I cannot in good conscience swear this oath. So it's neat to talk just a little bit about that. The German word is gewissen. And it's really the same word, listen, knowledge, okay? But conscience is for, you know, it's a difficult subject, but I think for the inspirationists we could say that it's the focus of a person's moral life, okay? A good moral life is one which conforms to the laws and the will of God, and conscience is the mechanism through which a person knows what that will is, okay? I like to look at it just from the two words. Con means bringing together, science, knowledge. Bringing together knowledge. Conscience brings together the knowledge of God's laws and the particular circumstances in which we're in. Okay, so that we can decide what the right action is to be. In the Amana Constitution, in the Constitution of the Amana Society, the communal society, in Article 1 of the Constitution, it says that our purpose is to serve God according to his laws and his requirements in our own consciences. They're always appealing to conscience. And with the will of God revealed to it, conscience dictates action. Okay? You have to follow your conscience. If you do not, that alone is a sin. Okay? In the case of oaths, God's law is clear. Jesus' words in Matthew. Okay? Do not swear. So Jesus' words are clear, and then the action is also clear. Refuse to swear. What should you do? So the problem with conscience is that it can make a mistake. And a couple years ago, Tony Berger had a commentary in church where he talked about how people acting on their good conscience did stuff that today we would find abhorrent, okay? But they followed their conscience. So that the act of conscience in itself doesn't say that what I did is exactly right, but I have to follow it if I believe that's true. It gets very messy, okay? And there are people who spend a lot of time trying to figure out what to do to keep their conscience clear. But anyway, back to oaths. Like I said, one of the main reasons the community came to America was because here they were free to not swear oaths. And that had gotten them into a lot of trouble in Germany. So it's worth just looking, why is that? Why in the United States did they not have to swear? And I think it really goes back to England in the 17th century, way back about 100 years even before our community. The 17th century in England was flooded with oaths. They even published books, Book of Oaths, where there's over 1,000 oaths, text of oaths in this book. It's published in 1649. It was a time of political turmoil, religious turmoil in England. A king was beheaded, a republic was set up, a king came back, there was a Protestant religion, there were Presbyterians, there were Catholics, you know, everyone kind of fighting for power, and whoever was in power at the time was asking for loyalty oaths. So people who took their oaths seriously were asking questions like, when is an oath no longer binding? How does one get out of an oath? What about conflicting oaths? Can I take this oath if I already took this oath? It was a mess. And one religious group, the Quakers, finally decided enough is enough. And they looked to Matthew 5:34, 5:37, and decided that they too would never swear an oath. And this got them into a lot of trouble in England. John Fox, a Quaker leader, and many other Quakers were imprisoned dozens of times for not swearing oaths. the Quakers looked to Matthew and James just like the Inspirationists, but the Quakers took one rationale that I find really fascinating that I never see in the Inspirationists. The Quakers said swearing an oath implies hypocrisy. It implies a double standard. Okay? You should always tell the truth. Okay? You shouldn't tell the truth only when under oath. But, you know, they've got a point. So one should always speak the truth. Finally, in 1695, just about 20 years before our Inspirationists got going in England, the English Parliament passed a law that allowed people in some limited circumstances to affirm and attest rather than swear. Over the years, this was expanded upon, and it carried over to the United States Constitution and to the United States laws, where in the United States, anybody can attest or affirm rather than swear. All you got to do is tell the person, I'd rather not swear, I'd want to attest or affirm. So thanks in part to the Quakers, the Inspirationists found a safe place in the United States where they could act out their belief in not swearing oaths. We don't think a lot about oaths today like they did back then, and I think in part it's because oaths have become more secular. That part about a divine witness has kind of faded out in oaths, I think. Oaths from a religious standpoint, God is the witness and the enforcer, and the risk in breaking an oath is your soul and your salvation. Okay? In the secular world, the government is the witness and the enforcer, and your risk is jail and fine. It's the crime of perjury. Okay? So that lying is not a crime in the United States. Lying under oath is. It's called perjury. So I think the fact, like I said, it's an interesting transition, but I think most people today don't really look at oaths in that same religious manner that the early Inspirationists did. And I think already the Bruder Rad was detecting that in the late 19th century when they were reminding the community, remember, don't do this, okay? Because they had been, especially in the United States where they could just affirm and attest, it just didn't have that religious hammer that